Joining us, he is the chief counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, counsel to the president. Jay Sekulow is back with us. Good to talk to you, sir. How are you?
You too. Good.
I want to first go to the biggest question that everybody seems to now be asking, and it seems like a decision is in the process of being made, and that is whether the president, who had stated himself that he would not mind speaking to Robert Mueller, will in fact speak to Robert Mueller, which every attorney that I know is saying is a bad idea. You happen to be the president's attorney.
Right. Well, look, we've said this is an ongoing process, and in that process, you evaluate the situation and you make recommendations. Look, I've been very clear. I was on your broadcast last night on television. I've said it on my own broadcast. My inclination, the inclination of the legal team is not, we haven't been shy about this, is not to allow the president to sit down for an interview for a whole host of reasons, the most significant of which is we believe that it's inappropriate under Article 2 of the United States Constitution. Having said that, and as I've said before, the president has expressed a desire to sit down, so that's why you continue negotiations, because ultimately the president's the one that makes the decision, but we have strong recommendations, and as more of this information comes out, as you just reported, that goes to the fundamental issue that I've been saying for a long time, is you look at what commenced in the beginning of this inquiry, what started this investigation, and there has been, corruption from the start of this, and unfortunately it permeates the whole situation, and you could go through the parade of horribles, as I call it again, but in the reality, there's not a lawyer in America that would say under those circumstances, oh, just let the president walk in for an interview. Well, we're not going to do that anyway. No one's going to let anybody just walk into an interview. So there's a process you go through, and part of that process, the most significant part of that process, is you weigh the issues as it relates to the United States Constitution, the impact on the president, current, and the office of the presidency. And that's what we are dealing with. And at the end of the day, we will then make the conclusion. We sent in a response today. I'm not going to get into the content of that response, but needless to say, what we are proposing is something that we would be comfortable with. Whether Bob Mueller's team is or not, that's going to be up to them.
Well, I got to assume at some point this is now going to come to a head here. Is it coming to a head? Are we going to know for sure in a relatively short period of time? Because as far as I can tell, and looking from the outside in, it seems like this has been going on now for quite a long time.
So, look, if you look at it historically, it's not that long in the sense of the negotiation about an interview, because this is what happens in these kind of situations. There's a back and forth. But I've been practicing law a long time. I've represented you for a long time. Let's be realistic here. You know me, and you've known me for a long time as your friend and your lawyer. Yeah. I don't give dates. I don't say...
No, and you're a very tough lawyer. Look, I love you both as a friend and a lawyer, and I know how tough you are, and I know you're very methodical, and I think I have a pretty good understanding of how you think. I just think, to me, you know how I feel about Robert Mueller. You know how I feel about Andrew Weissman. You know how I feel about, the team of Jeannie Ray. Why is she there? She worked for the Clinton Foundation. Andrew Weissman's track record. Right now we're watching the trial of the century. Paul Manafort is, this has nothing to do with Russia, nothing to do with collusion, nothing to do with the president, nothing to do with the campaign. But there's an indictment about tax charges from 2005. Judge Ellis in the case said this is to put the screws to Manafort so he'll sing or compose for the purpose of impeaching or prosecuting President Trump. That's scary.
Here's the situation that we have. And this is what my colleague and friend Rudy Giuliani said. He said today that millions of pages of documents have already been given. Testimony from dozens of witnesses have been provided. And we're restating what we've been saying for a long time, and that is it's time for the Office of Special Counsel to conclude its inquiry without further delay. We believe that. We believe that we've been the most transparent of any type of presidential inquiry there's ever been. We've handed over, that's just from the White House side of 1.4 million documents. There's others as well. 1.4 million documents, campaign documents, part of that. There's a lot of documents, millions, and witnesses.
So
and
there
we've
are
allowed those witnesses to go. Hold it. And we've allowed those witnesses to go forward. And now they want to ask the president, what were you thinking when you fired James Comey? The answer to that is no. You don't get to ask that question in our view. So you come back with, as these things work through, to answer your question, you come back then with a response to the special counsel that says, this is what we're willing to do, this is where we're not willing to go, and see if there is a place that we can arrive at. You always hope you can. We'll see.
There are two issues. One is, quote, obstruction. The other would be some type of collusion, or now they're using the word conspiracy with Russia. I'm looking at, I don't think from the beginning this was a legitimate special counsel. I think there's a certain illegitimacy to this. Number one, I think that politics...
It started as a counterintelligence investigation and morphed into this other. Because why? Because there's not evidence of collusion with the Russians on the campaign.
Okay, there's none. And what's frustrating to me is somebody that has been peeling every layer of the onion and pointing out that there is evidence of some Russian interference and collusion that nobody seems to want to pay attention to, and that's Hillary funneling money to a law firm, Perkins Coie, and Perkins Coie hiring Fusion GPS, and they're hiring a foreign agent by the name of Christopher Steele, and Christopher Steele is then, providing, salacious details that had never been verified about Donald Trump, as a matter of fact, now have been debunked. And that becomes the basis of a FISA warrant. And more importantly, that information is spread to the American people, which is nothing but propaganda, misinformation, and lies. And it was used to get a FISA warrant to spy on an American citizen who happened to be a campaign associate of Trump in an election year, Jay.
Yeah, this is look. I call it the parade of horribles. You remember, I was critical of James Comey when he intervened by doing that whole stunt he did where he laid out all the facts and then said, "I'm not going to." I don't think he should have said anything. Then he reopens it. Then he closes it again. That kind of what he did there, as the Inspector General said, was wrong from the start and violated the internal rules and regulations of the United States Department of Justice. Now, we're still waiting for the IG report as it relates just to James Comey. But the issues of bias, all of this factors in. You have to look at all of this when it comes down to the question that everybody's debating today and talking about, and that is whether there will be an interview or not. And I think what we have to understand, and this is, I believe, in our view, as the president's lawyers here, that we have to look at all of these factors and then make the recommendation that we think is correct. And as I said, we're not inclined to have him sit down for an interview. That doesn't mean it won't happen, but that's not our inclination. And so far we have not, in our view, have not really seen anywhere near the standard. First of all, I think there's a whole prohibition under the Constitution. And then under the ESPY case, which I don't want to get in the weeds here, which is a case that governs the District of Columbia, there's a two-part standard. I don't believe they've met that. Having said that, the president has said he would like to interview, if possible. I hope at the end of the day he will, and I believe he will, listen to his lawyers. But we'll make an informed decision. Do I think it's coming sooner rather than later? Yes, but that's not an answer to your question on when. Sooner rather than later, yeah, I think.
How does this end? I mean,
I do think it's time for this to be put to bed.
When do you think when does this end? I mean, and how do you think it ends?
Well, it ends with a report. I mean, remember, this is not a trial. This is a report. There'll be a report. That report will say whatever they put in. We're drafting our own. As you can imagine, we've been involved in the evidence for over a year now on the legal side of this. And I think, as Rudy Giuliani said, there's still a lot of negotiating to be done if there's any kind of movement on a possibility of an interview. We'll see. Written questions would be as a form of an interview, too, and that there's a historic precedent for that. Lawrence Walsh did that with Ronald Reagan, so there's historic precedent for that. We'll see. I'm hopeful that it gets resolved quickly for the good of the country and for the fact that I really believe that there's no more witnesses to interview as far as we know. There's no more documents to turn over. That's where it is.
Let me ask you.
I want to say this. A demand to interview the president this is not like interviewing any other person that's a potential defendant in a case. It's the president of the United States, and the constitutional impact of that is very significant. So
the Constitution is with the president, and if Mueller were to subpoena, what is that? Potentially a year or long fight that goes to the Supreme Court?
Look, I mean, I came in this case because that's what I do is Supreme Court practice, and. Look, the constitutional issue here is significant. You'd go to a district court with a motion to quash. That would take a period of time. Then you go to a court of appeals, and then probably the entire court of appeals for the District of Columbia. It's called an en banc review, and then either side wins or loses. They'll take the case up on a petition for certiorari. That'll be argued for a period of time. Yeah, it could it could easily take a year.
Let me ask you about.
I don't know if that's where this goes. I think that maybe it does, but I'm hard pressed to me to believe that the Department of Justice would do that in light of their own policies and guidelines and in light of the existing precedent.
All right, Jay, stay right there. Jay Sekulow, Chief Counsel, American Center for Law and Justice, Counsel for the President. All right, as we roll along, Sean Hannity Show. Jay Sekulow, Chief Counsel, American Center for Law and Justice, Counsel to the President. With all the talk about, what the president had said well over a year ago, that, at this meeting at Trump Tower, there might have been some talk about, oh, we've got some information on Hillary you might be interested in, which is perfectly legal, and every politician would take that call and meeting. But there is evidence of collusion or conspiracy, because we got a tape of Adam Schiff, Jay Sekulow. I want to play a little bit of it for you, where he's dying to get information and dirt on Donald Trump from a Russian.
Okay, and so Buzova met with Trump in New York at some point after the 2013 Miss Universe
yes,
pageant.
absolutely. And she got compromising materials on Trump after their short relations.
Okay, and what's the nature of the compromise?
Well, there were pictures of naked Trump.
Okay. And so Putin was made aware of the availability of the compromising material?
Yes, of course. Buzova shared those materials with Sobchak, and Sobchak shares those materials with Putin, because she's a goddaughter of Putin, and Putin decided to press on Trump.
And the materials that you can provide to the committee or to the FBI, would they corroborate this allegation?
Sure, of course. When they were in Ukraine, we got there.
All right, just for the sake of time, I mean, and it goes on. How is that any different from what they're accusing the president of and his family of?
I'll give you the biggest difference. The conversation that took place, based on what Don Jr. and others have said, was based on what ended up being not about compromising campaign material, but the substantive conversation ended up being about the Majinsky Act and the Russian adoption. So there you have it. That would be
and there's nothing illegal if somebody to meet with somebody. Oh, you got information on my opponent. What is it? Doesn't that happen every? And then you got the dossier that Hillary paid for, except that was Russian lies she paid for.
You know, here's what people do gloss over, and I think Alan Dershowitz has been really effective on this. And that is, in the context of campaign finance law, and I argued one of the campaign finance cases at the Supreme Court.
20 seconds.
And it was actually a portion of McCain-Feingold. I had Title III, which involved minors not being able to contribute to campaigns. Same kind of rationale of what it would mean to elections. And I won that case, my section, 9-0. And there's overriding a lot of this, and you have to put it under the context. You have a statute that has to be interpreted consistent with the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. The ability to not only give information, but receive information. So
thanks, Jay. I've got to roll here.